booth was still set with a coffee cup. That was the first thing Mara Doyle noticed on Tuesday morning, clearing tables before the lunch rush. The cup had been there since Saturday, turned right side up, waiting. She had not moved it. She was not sure why. Donnie Falk always sat in the corner booth by the window, always ordered black coffee and 2 eggs scrambled, always tipped $3 in exact change. He had been doing that every Saturday and every Tuesday for 11 years. He had not come Saturday. He had not come Tuesday. And the cup sat there like a question nobody had asked out loud yet. She asked it that afternoon. She had already spoken to Yvette, the girl who bussed tables on weekend mornings, and to Carl at the gas station adjacent to the diner parking lot, who sometimes noticed if Donnie's truck went past on Tuesday mornings because the diner was on his way from where Donnie lived. Carl had not noticed either way. Yvette had not been there Saturday. Mara had thought about calling the police and had picked up the phone once and set it back down because she was not sure what she would say. She had thought about driving out to Garvey Road herself. But the truth was she did not know the address, and the only thing she knew about Donnie's life outside this diner was what she had gathered from 11 years of brief conversations about the weather and the grain prices, and whether the high school football team was going to make the playoffs, and sometimes, rarely, in a way that was always slightly sideways and careful, about Helen. The man who walked in just before 2 o'clock had the look of someone who had been driving for a while and was not entirely sure what he was doing in her diner. He stood inside the door for a moment, letting his eyes move around the room the way people do when they have spent enough years in situations where a room could change on you fast. He was tall, somewhere in his late 30s, lean in the particular way of someone who had not eaten quite enough over a long stretch of months. He wore a canvas work jacket the color of dried sage, jeans with road dust on the knees, and boots that had seen more pavement than any boots ought to. A German shepherd sat down beside him without being asked, amber and black, enormous and still, ears forward, watching the room with the same unhurried patience the man carried. Mara set down the coffee pot. "Sit anywhere," she said. Then, because something in the way the man stood made her reconsider whether he was looking for a table or something else, she said, "You need a menu or just coffee?" "Coffee," he said. "And a question, if you have a minute." She poured the coffee and sat down across from him, which was something she did not ordinarily do with strangers. The dog settled under the table without a sound. His name was Garrett Pruitt. He had a face that had been handsome once and was now something better. The kind of face that only acquires its real quality after several hard years have worked it over, a long jaw, dark eyes that stayed flat and still when he talked, a scar along the outer edge of his left brow that ran maybe 1.5 inches in a clean diagonal line, and a short crop of dark hair going gray at the temples in a way that put him somewhere between 38 and 42, depending on the day. He was a gunnery sergeant, former, out 14 months, and the name of his dog was Cass. He asked about the man at the corner booth. Mara told him what she knew, which was not enough. Donnie was 69 years old, a retired pipe fitter, widower, lived alone in the house on Garvey Road, out past the grain elevator. No children that she was aware of. He ate here because the alternative was eating alone in his kitchen, and at least here there was the sound of other people. She had never been to his house. She had never called him. She did not have his number. She had simply noticed, the way you notice a sound that has been part of the background of your days and then suddenly goes missing, that he was not there. Garrett looked at the coffee cup. "You leave it there on purpose?" he said. It was not quite a question. Mara looked at the cup and then back at the man. "I didn't want to put it away before I knew," she said. "If this kind of story stays with you, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the bell. Stay until the very end." Garrett asked for Donnie's address. Mara did not have it, but she knew Fern Hapscom at the hardware store had done some work for Donnie in the fall, reglazing a window frame, and Fern would have an address in her receipt book. He left $2 on the table for a coffee he had barely touched, stood, and the dog rose with him like a shadow made solid. Garvey Road was 6 miles out of town, a 2-lane county road that ran between flat fields and a stand of cottonwoods that were bare now in the November cold. The house sat back from the road about 200 feet, a 1-story white clapboard with a covered porch and an old satellite dish on the south-facing slope of the roof that probably did not work anymore. There was a truck in the gravel drive, a blue Ford F-15 that looked like it had last been washed sometime before the previous owner sold it. A metal mailbox at the end of the driveway had a red flag raised. Cass moved forward in the cab and put her nose to the window glass. Garrett pulled in and parked behind the truck. He sat for a moment, taking in the house. The front curtains were drawn. A single light was on somewhere at the back of the house, faint, the kind of light a television makes on a low setting rather than a lamp. The porch had a pair of rubber-soled boots standing beside the door, and that struck him because you only leave your boots outside if you intend to come back and put them on. He got out. Cass landed beside him and pressed close to his left side, not anxious, just present. They walked up the porch steps together. He knocked, waited, knocked again, louder, with the heel of his hand. Nothing. He tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside the house smelled like coffee from a pot that had cooked down to burnt residue, like unwashed dishes, and like something else that Garrett identified in the back of his mind before he was willing to name it, the thin, medicinal sweetness of a person who had been lying still for too long. He moved through the short entry hall into the kitchen. The coffee pot on the counter was an old drip machine, and the element was still on, the remnant in the pot reduced to a dark ring. He turned it off. Cass had gone ahead into the back of the house. He found Donnie Falk in the bedroom, lying on his side on the bed, fully dressed in his work clothes, boots off, one arm folded under his head, like he had lain down for a moment and not gotten back up. He was breathing. That was the first and most important thing. He was breathing, slow and shallow, but breathing. His color was wrong, a dull yellowish gray at the temples, and when Garrett put 2 fingers to his wrist, the pulse was there but weak and irregular. Cass sat down at the foot of the bed and did not move. Garrett called 911 from the bedroom and then stood in the doorway watching Donnie's chest rise and fall, measuring the intervals the way you learn to measure things when intervals matter, while he told the dispatcher what he had found and what the address was. The dispatcher asked if Donnie had any family she should attempt to contact. Garrett looked around the room at the framed photographs on the dresser, a woman with dark hair in a sundress beside a lake somewhere, a wedding photograph with the same woman, younger, and Donnie younger, beside her, a snapshot of the 2 of them at what looked like a county fair. "I don't know," he said. "I'll find out." The ambulance came in 11 minutes. The 2 paramedics were efficient and careful with Donnie, who came around enough to speak a few words while they assessed him. His name, his wife's name, Helen. Then a kind of confused distress when one of the paramedics asked if there was anyone they should call, and Donnie said, "She'll be at the table," meaning Helen, meaning the kitchen table, meaning a woman who had died 4 years ago in the same house. Garrett rode behind the ambulance into town. Cass sat in the back seat and watched the road. At the Harron County Regional Medical Center, a doctor named Pemberton told Garrett that Donnie had likely suffered a mild cardiac event, sometime in the previous 36 to 48 hours, compounded by dehydration and low blood sugar. None of it was catastrophic. All of it had been allowed to become serious by the absence of anyone checking on him. With rest, fluids, and monitoring, Pemberton said, Donnie would likely be functional within a week. Then the doctor looked at Garrett with the professionally cautious expression doctors use when they want to say something they cannot quite say as a physician. "He lives alone?" Pemberton asked. "Yes," Garrett said. "Anyone we can contact?" "I'm working on that," Garrett said. He was not technically working on that. He had stopped in a diner and asked a question and ended up here. Something about the way Pemberton said it, though, the flat institutional shorthand of a man who had seen this particular situation too many times, made Garrett hear it as something more than a request for paperwork. It was a question about the larger arrangement. A retired pipe fitter eating alone in a diner booth twice a week, tipping $3 in exact change. Nobody noticing for 4 days. He went back out to the truck and sat with Cass in the parking lot for a while. The November sky was a uniform white, the kind that does not offer much in the way of weather promises either direction, just cold and flat and very wide. Cass put her head on his knee. He had been heading south. He had been approximately heading toward a job on a grain operation in Kimball County where a man named Breslow had said there might be work through the spring. He had been in Aldine for one night, at the motel on the highway, because the clutch cable on the truck had been making a sound that concerned him, and the only foreign truck shop in the county was here. He had walked to the diner because it was close and he was hungry. He had been planning to leave this morning. He scratched Cass behind the ear. "All right," he said. He did not say what he meant by that. He did not need to. Cass settled. He went back inside and told the floor nurse at the desk that he would be a point of contact for the patient until a family member could be identified. The nurse, a woman in her 50s named Dolores, who had the measured manner of someone who had been navigating the gap between institutional protocol and practical human need for a long time, wrote down his name and phone number without asking why he had appointed himself to this. His wife's maiden name was Garrett, Dolores said, glancing at his name on the form. "My first name," he said. "I know," she said. He might like to know that. He stayed in Aldine. The motel had a room that rented by the week at a rate that was easier to manage than daily. A ground-floor room at the end of the building where he could leave the window cracked and Cass could sleep on the floor without either of them troubling the other guests. He drove back out to Donnie's house the second morning and brought in the mail from the box and turned off the one remaining light and made sure the door was locked. He set Donnie's boots inside the door. The stack of mail was 6 days deep, catalogs and utility statements mostly, and one piece that was not either. It was an envelope from something called Arbor Ridge Property Management, on paper stock that was a little too thick and a little too white, the kind of envelope that announces its own importance. He set it on the kitchen table and did not open it, because it was not his mail. He did not put it back with the rest of the stack either. He visited Donnie at the hospital that afternoon. He was 5'9", broad through the chest and shoulders from decades of heavy work, with a full head of white hair that had probably been dark once, and hands that were disproportionately large and scarred at the knuckles, the hands of a man who had spent his life doing work that left marks. His face was round and weathered, and once he was conscious and upright in the hospital bed, and had some color back in his skin, carried an expression of compressed patience that suggested he had spent most of his life waiting for things to be slightly better than they were and had made a reasonable peace with the gap. He looked at Garrett the way men of that generation look at strangers who have done them a service, with a kind of careful dignity that is trying not to be embarrassed. "You found me," Donnie said. "Your waitress was worried," Garrett said. "She had your booth held." Something moved through Donnie's face at that, brief and unmistakable. He looked down at his hands. "Mara's a good woman," he said. Garrett asked about family. Donnie had a sister in Tucson, Patricia, 2 years older than him, who had her own health situation and who Donnie spoke to on the phone on Sundays. No children. He and Helen had tried, and it had not worked out. And they had made a life that was good without it, and he did not want anyone to think otherwise. He had the house on Garvey Road, which he and Helen had bought in 1987, and a small pension from the pipe fitters local, and that was what there was. He paused, looking at the window of his hospital room, where the afternoon light was coming in, flat and gray. "She came here in 1982, he said. "We both grew up different places, met in Tulsa at a cousin's wedding. She had never been to this part of the state. I brought her up here in October just to show her, and she stood in the field behind the house and looked at the horizon and said she thought she could live the rest of her life in a place where you could see that far." He stopped. "So we did." He said it without drama. The way people report facts, they have long since stopped expecting to make anyone else understand. Garrett had spent enough time in enough places to know that the relationship between a person and a particular piece of land was real and specific and not always explainable. He had seen it from the outside enough times to recognize it in Donnie's face now. The particular set of someone who has anchored their whole private geography to a piece of ground and cannot conceive of being somewhere else. Garrett asked about Arbor Ridge property management. The compression in Donnie's face changed. It did not become anger exactly, more like the look of a man who had been waiting for a subject to arrive and was not glad that it had. "They want to buy the house," Donnie said. It had started 8 months ago. An initial letter, friendly in tone, expressing interest in the property at a figure that was somewhat below the assessed value, but not so far below as to be insulting. Donnie had not responded. A second letter, a little more detailed about the company and their intentions, with an upgraded offer. A third letter with the number higher again. Then a man in person, twice, in a company truck, wearing a jacket that had a small logo on the breast, polished and pleasant in that way that had always made Donnie uneasy. A man named Cavell who said all the right words in the right order and whose eyes never matched the words he was using. The offers had been getting better. They were also getting more insistent. The most recent letter, the one in the envelope on the table, would be the fourth written contact. Donnie had not signed anything. He had not called them back. He had also not told anyone in town because he was not entirely sure what there was to tell, and because Donnie had spent 69 years not wanting to make anyone else carry his problems. Garrett sat with this for a moment. "Do you want to sell?" he asked. "No," Donnie said. It was not said loudly or with emphasis. It was said the way a man states a fact he has lived with long enough that stating it costs nothing and changes nothing. "Then you don't have to," Garrett said. Donnie looked at him. "They say there are back taxes. A county lien from 2019. I paid what I owed in 2019. I have the receipt. But they say the county records show different." He paused. "I don't know how to fight something like that." Garrett looked at the window and then back at Donnie. "I do," he said. He was in Aldine for the third week before he understood what he was actually doing. He had told himself it was temporary, that he would stay until Donnie was home and stabilized and pointed in the right direction, that he would make a few calls and hand off whatever he found to someone with more standing to carry it. He was still telling himself that on the morning he drove to the Heron County Courthouse and asked to speak with someone in the property records office. The woman he spoke with was named June Abelard, about 50, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a manner that suggested she had fielded a great many requests from a great many people and had developed a careful system for knowing which ones to take seriously. When Garrett explained what he was looking for and why, she looked at him over the glasses for a moment. "You're not his family," she said. "No," he said. "You're not an attorney?" "No." "But you want to review his property lien record." "I want to understand how a lien got attached to a property in 2019 when the owner has a receipt showing he paid the assessment in full in the same year." She looked at him another moment. Then she took her glasses off, cleaned them on the hem of her sweater, and put them back on. "Give me about 40 minutes, she said. She came back with a manila folder and a printed map from the county's GIS system and set them both on the counter between them. She had also brought a second cup of coffee for Garrett without asking, which he noticed. What she found was not simple, and it was not an accident. The lien on Donnie's property traced back to an administrative transfer in the county records in late 2019, in which a partial assessment on a neighboring parcel had been incorrectly attached to Donnie's parcel number. The error was the kind that could happen through clerical mistake. It was also the kind that could be manufactured through careful pressure applied to the right low-level process at the right moment. The neighboring parcel June showed him on the assessor's map had been purchased 3 years ago by a limited liability company whose registered agent in the state was a firm called Consolidated Land Services, LLC. Arbor Ridge Property Management was not in the county records. Consolidated Land Services was. It had purchased 4 parcels in the county over the past 3 years. All 4 were adjacent to or near land that had been surveyed for potential drainage improvement projects funded by a federal agricultural infrastructure program, the kind of program whose existence was a matter of public record, but whose specific parcel-level implications were the kind of thing you had to know to look for. June pointed to the survey boundaries on the GIS map with a pencil eraser, tracing the edges of the 4 parcels and the corridor between them. "If those 4 connect," she said, "plus Donnie's parcel here, you get a continuous strip from the county road to the drainage basin." She paused. "I don't know what the infrastructure timeline is. I'm a county clerk, not a planner, but I know what a continuous strip looks like." Consolidated Land Services was. Garrett asked June if she knew whether any other properties in the county had seen similar record anomalies in the past 3 years. "I've noticed 2, she said quietly. "Both elderly residents, both living alone, both on parcels that border agricultural land with infrastructure potential." She paused. "Both have received offers from the same company." "Have either of them signed?" he asked. "One did. 6 months ago. She moved to her daughter's place in Omaha. I don't think she knew what she was signing." The name on the registered agent documents for Consolidated Land Services was a man named Ellis Cavell. Garrett drove back to the motel and sat with Cass on the floor of the room, with his back against the bed and his phone in his hand for a while before he started making calls. The first was to a legal aid organization in the county seat, where a young attorney named Summers handled property disputes and had been, she told him when she answered, aware of the Consolidated Land Services pattern for about 4 months, but lacking a client willing to pursue it formally. The second call was to a woman he knew from his 3rd deployment, Kira Voss, who had left the Marines 2 years before him, and was now an investigative reporter with a regional newspaper based in the state capital. He told her what he had found. She asked him to email her June's name with her permission, the parcel numbers, and a copy of Donnie's payment receipt. Donnie gave permission for all of it from his hospital bed that evening. He held the receipt in his large, scarred hands and looked at it for a moment before handing it to Garrett. "I kept everything," Donnie said. "Helen always said, 'You keep the paper. Everything that matters, keep the paper.'" "She was right," Garrett said. "She was right about most things," Donnie said. He said it plainly, the way men say things they have carried so long they no longer hurt exactly. They just weigh. The day Donnie came home was the second week of November. The cottonwoods along Garvey Road had dropped the last of their leaves overnight, and the fields had that flat iron look of land going into its long pause. Garrett drove him from the hospital in Donnie's own truck, which he had kept running in the parking lot twice a day to make sure it did not go cold, and Cass rode in the back seat with her chin on the edge of the window and watched the countryside go by. Donnie did not say much on the drive. When they turned into his driveway and the house came into view, he sat very still for a moment, and Garrett did not say anything either. "Good to see it," Donnie said finally. "It held up," Garrett said. They were in the house 20 minutes before Mara Doyle arrived from the diner, with a covered dish that turned out to be pot roast, and behind her came Fern Hapscom from the hardware store, with a smaller container that turned out to be the apple crisp her mother had taught her to make, and a man Garrett had not met named Birch Overland, who had farmed the section east of Donnie's property for 30 years, and who came in through the back door without knocking the way people do when they have been entering a house for decades. Birch was 63, thick-necked and deliberate in his movements, with a gray mustache and a hearing aid in his left ear and the look of a man who did not come to things unless he meant them. "Heard you had some trouble," Birch said to Donnie. "Some," Donnie said. "You should have called." "I know it," Donnie said. Cass moved from person to person, and Garrett watched her do it, the way she would approach each one, drop her nose briefly, and then either settle or drift away. She settled at Mara's feet for a while, then at Birch's. Then she went and stood beside Donnie's chair and stayed there. Garrett ate pot roast at Donnie's kitchen table with 4 people he had not known 3 weeks ago and thought about Kimball County, about the grain operation, about Breslow, who had said there might be work. He thought about the road south, about the particular quality of the highway at first light when you are moving and the day is still unwritten. He had been moving for 14 months. Before that, he had been in the Corps for 17 years. He had been, in some fundamental way, in motion for most of his adult life. He looked at the window above the kitchen sink, where the November light was going amber and thin, and he did not think about Kimball County for a while. The letters from Arbor Ridge stopped after Attorney Summers filed a formal dispute of the lien with the county records office, citing the administrative error and attaching Donnie's payment documentation. What did not stop was Ellis Cavell. He came to the house on a Wednesday morning, the same polished truck, the same jacket with the small logo, the same practiced ease in his bearing. Garrett was sitting on the porch when he pulled in, drinking coffee, and Cass was beside him. The morning had a thin frost on it, the grass in the yard still white at 9 o'clock with cold that had come in overnight from the northwest. The fields across the road were silver in the early light. Cavell was 47, medium height and compact, with a kind of tan that does not come from outdoor work and a haircut that cost more than anything Garrett owned. He came up the porch steps and stopped when he saw the dog. "Is that animal secured?" he asked. "She's fine," Garrett said. "You're the one she doesn't know." Cavell rearranged his expression and extended his hand. Garrett shook it without standing. "I'm looking for Donald Falk," Cavell said. "He's not available," Garrett said. Cavell's eyes moved from the dog to the door to Garrett. "And you are?" "Someone who lives here," Garrett said. He had not planned to say that. He examined the sentence after it was out, and found that it was true in the only way that mattered, which was that he had been sleeping in the spare room for 2 weeks and driving Donnie to his cardiology follow-up and making coffee in the morning, and he had not thought about Kimball County in several days. Cavell stayed on the porch for another 4 minutes, speaking carefully and pleasantly about the company's continued interest in the property and the flexibility of their terms. And Garrett let him finish before he said, calmly and without any particular emphasis, that the lien in question was being formally disputed through the county records office, that the documentation supporting the dispute had also been provided to an attorney with the Regional Legal Aid Office, and that the company might also wish to know that the parcel purchase history of Consolidated Land Services, LLC, had come to the attention of a reporter at the state capitol who was developing a story on property record irregularities in rural counties. Cavell's pleasantness became a different kind of stillness. Cass was watching him. "I hope Mr. Falk finds the situation resolves cleanly," Cavell said. "I expect he will," Garrett said. Cavell went back down the porch steps and got in his truck and drove out to the county road. Garrett watched the truck until it was out of sight and then finished his coffee. Cass put her head on his boot. Garrett sat on the porch for a while after that, watching the county road and the flat fields and the sky that was the particular white-gray of late autumn in this part of the country. He thought about Cavell's face at the moment when the pleasantness had gone thin, that fraction of a second before a man recalculates, and thought about how much planning and patience must have gone into what the LLC had been doing, identifying the infrastructure corridor, identifying the vulnerable properties along it, manufacturing the administrative pressure that would make elderly owners feel the ground shifting under them, make the offer feel like the stable option rather than the theft it was. It was not stupid or careless work. It was the kind of work that believed it would never be examined closely enough. He thought about Donnie saying he kept the paper. He thought about Helen and the horizon you could see from the field behind the house, and the 40 years between buying a place and becoming the kind of man who sat alone in a diner booth because the alternative was eating in a kitchen where someone used to sit across from you. There was a hawk working the far field, riding the wind in long, slow circles. Cass tracked it with her eyes from the porch without lifting her head. Kira Voss ran her story in the 3rd week of November. It was thorough in the way Kira did everything, careful and specific and documented, with 4 named sources, including the county clerk and Attorney Summers, and 2 residents from neighboring counties who had received similar offers from the same LLC. It named the registered agent by name. It did not name him at his request, though it described the administrative lien anomaly in enough detail that anyone familiar with the county would understand the shape of what had been attempted. The state attorney general's office opened an inquiry 4 days after the story ran. Cavell's LLC lost its registered agent status in the state the following month. A quiet institutional death that arrived with no drama, no confrontation, just a filing in a database and a door that closed. None of it happened loudly. None of it happened fast. It happened the way most things that matter happen, through patient work, through paper and process, through people deciding the ordinary channels were worth using because someone had bothered to understand how they worked. The Attorney General inquiry moved without Garrett having to do anything further. which was how these things worked, when the documentation was clean and the pattern was clear enough to be embarrassing. Summers handled the formal lien dispute, and the county assessor's office, once June's analysis had been formally submitted, moved quickly to correct the administrative transfer. The correction was not an admission of anything in the careful language of the letter it sent to Donnie, but it removed the lien and noted that the parcel record had been updated. Donnie read the letter at his kitchen table and set it face down and did not say anything for a moment. "Huh," he said finally. "Yeah," Garrett said. Donnie turned the letter over and looked at it again. "I want to send June Abelard a note," he said. "Is that appropriate?" "I think she'd appreciate it," Garrett said. Donnie got out a pen and a piece of notepaper from the drawer by the phone and wrote the note then and there in a large, careful hand and addressed the envelope himself. He licked the stamp and pressed it on and set the envelope by the door to take with him on his next trip into town. It was the most satisfied Garrett had seen him since coming home from the hospital. December came to Aldine with the first real snow of the season, 3 inches overnight that turned the fields white and silenced the county roads. Garrett was up at 5:30, as he always was, and he made coffee and let Cass out the back door and stood on the rear porch watching the pale gray light come up over the eastern fields while snow shifted off the bare branches of the cottonwoods in the wind. Donnie came out at 6:15 with his coffee mug and stood beside him. "You could stay," Donnie said. He said it the same way he said most things, without decoration or pressure, a fact laid down for consideration. "I know it," Garrett said. "The Weber's place, 2 sections over, has been empty since August. Old Frank Weber moved to his son's place in Cheyenne. The property manager has been trying to get a tenant in before winter. Good house, needs some work, but it's sound." Garrett drank his coffee. "I talked to Birch," Donnie said. "He said he can always use someone who knows equipment for the planting season." "I know equipment," Garrett said. "I know you do," Donnie said. "I've watched you." The cottonwood at the corner of the property had been planted sometime in the mid-1980s, which meant it was 40 years old now and taller than the house by a good margin, its upper branches moving in the light wind, shedding the snow in small white falls. Garrett had climbed that tree the first time he was 12 years old, and the last time he was 15. A neighbor's tree in a Nebraska county, 200 miles south of here, and it had nothing to do with this one. But it looked the same in the early morning light. He thought about the road. He thought about how 14 months felt like long enough to have proven whatever it was he had been trying to prove by staying in motion, which was either that he did not need any particular place or that no particular place needed him. He was not sure he had proven either. He was fairly sure he had disproven both. "The coffee you make is better than what I was making," Donnie said. "You were burning it," Garrett said. "I know it." A pause. "Helen always said so, too." Garrett looked at the fields going white and still in the early light. "I'll talk to the property manager," he said. Donnie nodded and drank his coffee and did not say anything else, because there was nothing else to say. The snow kept coming down in the quiet way of early December snow that is not trying to impress anyone, fine and steady, covering the ground in a slow, patient accumulation. Cass came back from the yard and shook herself on the porch and then pressed against Garrett's leg, and the 3 of them stood there for a while in the cold and the quiet and the growing light until it was time to go inside and make breakfast. Birch Overland stopped by that afternoon with a case of motor oil and a second-hand water heater he had pulled from a barn he was cleaning out, which he said the Weber place was going to need when the pipes started cycling in hard cold, and he left it in the bed of Garrett's truck without making anything of it. Fern brought over a set of kitchen curtains the following week that she said were taking up space in her storage room. Practical cream-colored curtains that she said had hung in her mother's house and were too good to throw away. Mara, without being asked about any of it, and without being told any of it, began setting the corner booth for 2 on Saturday mornings instead of 1. There is something about a community like this, small and plain and specific, that the world does not talk about very much because the world is not good at talking about ordinary loyalty. There is nothing dramatic about a case of motor oil left without ceremony in a truck bed, or curtains from a storage room, or a second coffee cup appearing at a table, where one has been enough for 11 years. These things are not ordinary, really. They are the way people say what they cannot quite bring themselves to say directly, which is, "We see you, and we are glad you are here, and we do not intend to let you disappear." Garrett Pruitt had spent 17 years being sent to places where he was needed, and then called away from them before anything could take root. He had gotten good at moving and had confused his competence at leaving with the belief that leaving was what he was made for. Most of the things worth having, he had learned, do not announce themselves as such when you encounter them. They announce themselves later, when you are trying to remember why you stayed, and you realize the answer has been in the room the whole time. The last time he drove past the diner, the corner booth had 2 coffee cups. Cass was watching from the passenger seat and made no sound and did not need to. She had known from the first morning on the porch of that white clapboard house what this place was, and she had been patient about it the way dogs are patient about things they understood before you did. She settled back against the door and watched the town go by. If you have ever known a quiet man who showed up for someone when no one asked him to, you understand what this story is really about. It is not about documents filed or companies exposed, though both of those things matter. It is about a cup left sitting on a table, and the ordinary miracle that someone noticed it was there. May you be seen by someone who notices when you are gone. May you find, as Garrett did, that the road eventually leads somewhere worth stopping. And may God hold you and the people you love in this season and every season after. Amen.